From the outside, it looked like the dream. Millions of views, loyal fans, a man building wild machines with his family by his side. But behind the sparks and smiles, something darker was unfolding. Because while everyone was watching the builds, Paul Cox was quietly carrying pressure most people never saw. Success didn't slow life down for him, it sped it up. And the higher Fab Rats climbed, the heavier the cost became. This isn't just a story about YouTube fame. It's about what happens when hard work, loss, and expectations collide, and the camera never stops rolling. Long before YouTube ever entered the picture, Paul was shaped by a world that didn't hand out shortcuts. He grew up surrounded by tools, metal, and the kind of work that demanded grit. Welding wasn't just something he learned, it became a way to focus, to escape, and to prove himself. While other kids were figuring out what they wanted to be, Paul was already building with his hands, solving problems the hard way. That mindset followed him everywhere. Fix it yourself, don't complain, push through it. But there was a downside to that mentality. Paul learned early on that stopping wasn't an option, even when things hurt. That drive made him exceptional, but it also wired him to carry weight silently. When Fab Rats eventually started, that same mindset fueled the channel's rise. Every project had to work, every problem had to be solved, and failure wasn't something he allowed himself to consider. What fans saw as impressive determination was, behind the scenes, a man training himself to never slow down. And that would matter later more than anyone realized. But when passion turns into responsibility, the pressure changes everything. Fab Rats didn't explode overnight. It started raw, unfiltered, and honest, just Paul building, fixing, and figuring things out as he went. That authenticity is what pulled people in. Viewers weren't just watching projects, they were watching real problem solving in real time. And slowly, the audience grew. Then it surged. Suddenly, people were counting on uploads, counting on builds, counting on Paul. What began as fun turned into expectation. Algorithms don't care about exhaustion. Audiences don't see stress behind the scenes. And as views climbed, so did the invisible pressure to keep topping the last video. Paul wasn't just building for himself anymore, he was building for employees, family, and a massive audience. Mistakes now had consequences. Delays caused speculation. Silence created rumors. The channel was thriving, but the workload was relentless. And the more Fab Rats succeeded, the harder it became to step away. Because when your passion becomes your livelihood, taking a break doesn't feel like rest, it feels like risking everything. And then Paul made a decision that raised the stakes even higher. After decades in construction, Paul faced a crossroads: stay safe with steady work or gamble. Everything on YouTube. Walking away meant betting his family's future on views, sponsors, and an audience that could disappear at any time. It wasn't reckless, but it was terrifying. Construction had limits, YouTube had none. Once that safety net was gone, there was no off switch. Every video mattered. Every project had to succeed. And if something went wrong, there was nowhere else to fall back on. Fans saw confidence. Paul felt responsibility, the kind that keeps you awake at night. What made it harder was that he wasn't doing this alone. His family was now fully tied to the channel's success. If Fab Rats failed, it wouldn't just be a career hit, it would hit home. That kind of pressure doesn't show up on camera. It sits quietly, builds slowly, and waits. Then life delivered a blow that no amount of skill could fix. The loss of Paul's father hit deeper than most viewers realized. This wasn't just grief, it was the loss of a guiding force. Someone who shaped his work ethic, his toughness, and his values. And yet, the uploads continued. Projects rolled on, smiles stayed on camera. Grief doesn't care about schedules. It drains energy, focus, and motivation. But Paul didn't step back. He couldn't. Fab Rats was already too big, too dependent on momentum, so he did what he always did, pushed forward. Some fans noticed subtle changes, less energy, a heavier tone, moments where Paul seemed distant. But the camera never tells the full story. Behind the scenes, he was processing something he couldn't weld, rebuild, or fix. And just when emotional weight was already overwhelming, his body gave out too. What happened next nearly ended everything. The Demolition Derby incident wasn't just another injury, it was brutal. Paul shattered his arm. instantly removing his ability to work the way he always had. For someone whose identity revolved around building, that was devastating. Pain was constant, recovery was slow, and the channel didn't pause. Physical injury collided with mental strain. Projects had to continue. Viewers expected content, and Paul was forced to rely on others while battling frustration and doubt. It raised a dangerous question. What happens if he can't do this anymore? For the first time, his limits were undeniable, and pushing through came with real consequences. The risk wasn't just physical, it was everything Fab Rats depended on. And as if that wasn't enough, outside pressure started closing in. As Fab Rats grew, scrutiny followed. Certain builds sparked accusations, legal stress surfaced, online speculation exploded, and Paul stayed quiet. That silence didn't calm things, it amplified them. Fans filled the gaps with theories. Critics got louder. Every move was dissected. When you're constantly creating, stopping to explain feels impossible, and Paul chose to focus forward instead of fueling drama. But silence has a cost. It turns curiosity into suspicion, and pressure into isolation. Through it all, Paul leaned harder on family, on loyalty, on the people who believed in him before the fame. Fab Rats wasn't just a channel anymore, it was a shield. And that's what makes the ending of this story hit so hard. Paul Cox's story isn't about machines, it's about endurance, about carrying weight quietly while the world watches highlights. Success didn't erase hardship, it magnified it. Every loss, injury, and rumor played out under a spotlight. Fab Rats survived because Paul refused to quit. But strength like that comes at a price, and the most heartbreaking part is that viewers rarely see it until much later, if ever. So the next time you watch sparks fly and builds come together, remember this: the strongest creators often carry the heaviest unseen battles. And sometimes, the real story isn't what gets built, it's what it costs to keep building.